Hi, I'm Dr. Sam Collins. I come from a family of chiropractors as my father was also a DC, and I worked with him for some 15 years in his office before beginning work with the HJR Company in 1998 as the director of the Insurance Information Network. Along with those duties, I helped develop, produce, and teach continuing education seminars across the United States. I also do extensive work as a billing expert for chiropractic on coding, billing, and documentation issues. I write a monthly article in Dynamic Chiropractic called Ask the Billing Expert. I am also on the reimbursement committee for United Healthcare and Optum Health, overseeing physical medicine and chiropractic claims. Clearly, we have an upcoming change for ICD-10 that a lot of doctors are having some difficulties with in understanding as to the breadth and change of it. We have developed into our corollaries a digital version that allows doctors to more easily research and search for codes, whether it's ICD-9 or 10, but make an easy conversion and transition. To make this transition simple, digital coding by H.J. Ross exceptionally simplifies it by allowing a provider once logged in to search for codes by keywords or by body areas. At the top of the site here, you'll note that we have a keyword or search section, and so therefore a provider simply could come in without doing anything further and simply type in a word such as subluxation. Once subluxation is typed in, you search it, and this will bring up the codes that have subluxation as part of it. You'll note on the left side is ICD-9, on the right side is ICD-10, and this just delineates the specific types of subluxation that the body can have. However, this may be a little bit overwhelming because you'll note, look at how many codes have subluxation in ICD-10. So a provider may say, hey, I have a Medicare patient, I need the code 739.1, which is the standard code for subluxation of cervical spine. With that one, once you click it, it just brings up the specific one for cervical. And upon searching, you'll note 739.1 here with M9901 indicates segmental somatic dysfunction of the cervical region, and parenthetically it indicates Medicare subluxation. So a provider can simply come in here, take the codes that they're currently using, and convert them to ICD-10. Most chiropractors generally only use 20 to 30 codes commonly, so simply they could come in and just simply convert the codes that are common to them. Obviously, there's going to be other codes and other areas the doctor may want to look at. So within this digital coding, we have a diagnostic code section here. You'll notice in the upper left. Just by clicking on that, this brings up an entire body. And you may simply just click on the left side, the name for it, or just click on the body part. In this instance, you can click on the head. And with the head, this will give you the neuromusculoskeletal or headache codes. Note left side ICD-9, right side ICD-10. Again, making it pretty simple, but of course, notice again the volume of codes that are related to headache. So the provider may come in and say, hey, I want to just look up codes that have migraine. So type in the word migraine, search for it, and then once it's searched, this just brings up the codes for migraine. Again, noting on the left side, ICD-9, the right side, ICD-10. As simply as just typing in a code or searching for a body area, the provider can find their diagnosis. However, they may say, I am looking for degeneration. So again, we type in the word degeneration. And once that's in, hit a search. Once it's searched, it brings up the code specific to degeneration. What makes this interesting is because ICD-10 gets much more specific. You'll note here the second code, M5030, is cervical disc degeneration that says for an unspecified cervical region. But then just above it, you'll note M5031, cervical disc degeneration for the high cervical region, meaning ICD-10 specifically indicates what vertebra has a disc that's degenerated. So that is C2 and 3 or C3 and 4, or we drop down, it could be C7T1 or C4-5, 5-6, or 6-7. In other words, much more specificity. One of the reasons that ICD-10 has many more codes is because it includes laterality, left and right, or bilateral. In addition, it makes specific coordination towards spinal segments, whether it's upper, middle, or lower parts of the spine. Realizing that laterality makes up a lot of the codes, for instance, a provider could come in and say, well, I have a person with carpal tunnel syndrome, and I'm not sure the code. Type in the word carpal, or in this case, we'll just do carpal tunnel. And you'll note when that comes up, it brings up the codes for carpal tunnel. And we go along here, and you'll notice carpal tunnel right upper limb or carpal tunnel left upper limb. Again, just going to two codes. Obviously, there's a third code that says unspecified, but clearly a provider will know whether or not it's the right or left. The entire use of this code set is really to make it simple for a provider where they can go in, click on a code, click on a body area, click on a keyword, much like a Google search, if you will. However, along with that, we've done some other things to hopefully make it simpler for the provider. If a provider is doing what most chiropractors do, which is coding within about 20 or 30 codes, they can have a favorite section. Each code allows you to pick it as a favorite, so one of the sections we have here is a favorite section. In this favorite section, you'll note that I've already picked some codes that are going to be like strain, sprain, neuritis, and so these are the codes that I might commonly use so that myself or a staff person could easily access it. Along with that, there's many other features to this new coding library. One of the things that we've added beyond just simple diagnosis is a CPT section. In the CPT section, it's going to give you an ability to look up CPT codes, and in this case, chiropractic manipulation, evaluation, and management. But beyond the standard things you might see, obviously it's going to give you the simple structure that we have in the CPT, but it's going to give you a little more detail specific about documentation, how to code it for specific services, whether or not it needs a modifier. Along with that CPT section, though, is for physical medicine. And where a lot of providers run into problems is, how do I define certain services? So this has all the physical medicine services listed. I'll scroll down here and you'll note that they're all here. But let's take a look specifically at neuromuscular reeducation. That code is 97112. When we look at the code, it says neuromuscular reeducation of movement and balance. And of course, that's just the short description. But to get a full description, and this is based on American Physical Therapy Association and AMA, it gives a full definition and documentation. That way, a provider has a much better chance of making sure they're understanding, am I using the right code? Now, along with the diagnosis as well is a code conversion. This code conversion for some is allowing them to convert a code as we did earlier, but let's say they have an ICD-10 code that they're already aware of. In this case, I'll give an example. M54.2 is the code for cervical or cervical pain. When I convert that, you'll note it just simply comes up and tells me that, oh, okay, if the ICD-10 code is M54.2, ICD-9 is 723.1. So that's one of the features that's listed along here as well. There is a section that's a dictionary. So a medical dictionary is allowing a provider to come in and say, well, I'm not sure quite the definition. So for instance, they can type in for myalgia. Now, of course, that's pretty simple muscle pain. And you'll see it indicates pain in one or more muscles, pretty straightforward. But in ICD-10, there's a separate code for fibromyalgia. So if we type in the definition of fibromyalgia, it then brings up a better definition that says a chronic disorder characterized by widespread tenderness and stiffness of muscles and associated with connective tissue structures that is typically accompanied by fatigue, headache, and sleep disturbances. So that way when a provider says, well, I have fibromyalgia, it'll allow them to delineate it a little bit better. And for instance, I'll give the example here. The code 729.1 is the code for myalgia in ICD-9. When I click the search here, notice all the different codes that come up for myalgia, including fibromyalgia. In fact, to make you see it easier, I'll just type in for fibromyalgia. And when I bring that up, you'll note here in the search, fibromyalgia, M79.7, fibromyalgia, fibromyositis, fibrositis, and fibrositis. In other words, making it more clear that we have fibromyalgia instead of just simple myalgia. Now, beyond that, and again, coding is what we focus on, but one of the things to do is that obviously their provider is going to do some orthopedic tests. And one of the things we've been able to do is have a listing of orthopedic tests that are common. Again, notice it's by body area, but also by all the different types of tests. Within these, and I'll just pick one of the tests here, Jackson compression test for cervical spine, it will tell you how the test is performed, what a positive test may mean by diagnosis, ICD-9 and ICD-10. And of course, this goes in ways that shows you it's just brachial plexus, but is it a root lesion? Is it upper cervical, lower cervical? So this delineates it. But again, every orthopedic test comes in that way with a diagnosis associated with it. The other thing that chiropractors obviously across the U.S. deal with is Medicare. Medicare, of course, has its own special diagnosis codes. So we have a Medicare guide section that allows them to go in, and it gives a few sections here on what chiropractors get paid for, the subluxation, the secondary diagnosis. But probably the best element here is that a provider could simply go to their state, such as, let's pick Texas. When they click on Texas, it's going to bring up the diagnosis codes associated for Medicare. In this case, it gives specific Group 1 codes, which are subluxation, but also codes that are specific to chiropractic based on their grouping as to how many visits. Notice it says here 18 visits chiropractic manipulation treatment for group B diagnosis. So that means when we go down to the group B diagnosis or group 2, we're going to have a few more visits than would be for a group 1. Every state is listed in this way. Some states have multiples. California, you'll note here, has the same, but allows a little bit different. They categorize it group 1 and 2. We want a provider to be able to have access to find out for their specific state, because another example is Georgia. While Georgia does use subluxation, it doesn't use secondary codes, so they just use the simple subluxation codes for 25 visits. This way, no matter what state you're in, it's specific to your state. This will be updated, of course, as they publish the ICD-10 code specific to Medicare. In the interim, of course, a provider could simply take that code and do the conversion for it. The final thing, and this was with something that Howard Ross started many years ago, was a diagnostic corollary. The corollary section is a little bit more complicated, but it's meant as an aid for a provider to help diagnose. So you'll pick cervical spine, and what this does, it just simply gives a complaint, what the findings are, and then the basic diagnosis of that. This in no means is intended to make a diagnosis for a provider, but to give them some direction as to what codes are possible. So for instance, they may start with just neck pain, no history of trauma for cervicalgia, but then based on different findings, whether or not is that subluxation, is it myalgia, or would it be fibromyalgia, depending on the level of exam that's done. The idea, again, is to give the provider a simple way of looking up a code. This new section here, or this new corollary, allows us to put a lot of topics in. We have diagnosis codes, CPT codes, conversions, and many things, but probably the best thing that's along with this is the document library. This is something that we continuously update, but it has a 1500 form a provider can use and type into. But probably the thing that most providers would use more commonly, and you'll see the amount of documents that are here, is the section for outcome assessments. Outcome assessments, of course, have become very important in Medicare under what's called PQRS. This is allowing a provider to demonstrate functional changes. So what a provider can do is, if they're familiar with the one they want to use, they just go through the list. In this case, I'll show oswestry, which is a low back index, and they have instant access to the oswestry, as well as how to score it and how to use it. So all the outcome assessments are listed there. We have other sections here that are just miscellaneous codes for CPT, even a Medicare section. In the Medicare section, beyond what I showed you earlier for coding, this also gives the office an ability to, if they need an ABN form, simply download it. It's right there on the site. We want to make this a one-stop shop where a chiropractor can go in and find all the information they need in relation to not only diagnosis, CPT, and news and new things that are occurring. We have a news section here that allows us to continually update news that's happening. For instance, the latest one is a top 10 ICD-9 to ICD-10 transition, myths and facts. This way a provider can go through and read to make sure they're understanding what is or is not required, when is the requirement. In fact, the first one here says to make sure ICD-10 begins October 1st, relating to the date of service. So even though a provider may send a bill in October, that if the treatment was in September, the billing will still have ICD-9. Not until they do treatment in October will the ICD-10 be used. And so again, it allows us a way of always continually updating them. And included in here are a series of video tutorials. This one specifically is on time services. I'm sure many of you have had offices where they've been audited for time services. This allows them to make sure they're understanding how do they bill time services. This gets into the 8-minute rule by CMS to make sure they've documented it properly. So within our document library and within our video tutorials, we feel this would allow a full service for a provider to simply go in and code, but also understand what they're doing to make sure they're compliant. This can be accessed from any computer within their network. If they have 10 computers in a network in an office, all of them can access it. You can access it from not only your computer, a tablet, or a smartphone.